Now, as a woman, many of us have been there, sitting in front of a doctor, wondering if our symptoms are being dismissed simply because of our gender. It turns out that what some of us suspect is indeed true, with American studies finding that women wait an average of 16 minutes longer than men to receive pain medicine in emergency rooms. We are also up to 25% less likely to receive opioids when we are suffering. Joining us now from New York is Maya Dusenbery, an American journalist and author of the book Doing Harm, the truth about how bad medicine and lazy science leaves women dismissed, misdiagnosed and sick. Maya, thanks so much for being with us. We know that gender bias affects many, if not all, interactions, but when it comes to medical diagnosis, it can actually at times lead to dangerous situations, can't it?
Yes, it certainly can. I think I became interested in this topic when I was hearing all of these stories from peers and friends who had that experience that is so common, where you just feel like you're not being taken seriously by the doctor. And when it comes to an acute setting like the ER, that sort of delay in getting diagnosed can be really the difference between life and death.
Why does it happen?
I really came to think that it is rooted in two problems that are really deeply entrenched in medicine today. One is that there's just a knowledge gap. So we just don't have as much information about women and their symptoms and the conditions that disproportionately affect them. And that's kind of the result of decades where we were leaving women out of a lot of clinical research, mostly studying men and just extrapolating the results to women, and really neglecting a lot of conditions that are common among women, and not putting a lot of research funding towards understanding them. And that really combines with this other big problem, which I call the trust gap, where, as in other realms, women's voices are just not taken as seriously, aren't given the same authority, and so too often their own reports of their symptoms, subjective symptoms like pain or fatigue, are just not believed by doctors.
Are there some conditions in which medical bias against women is indeed more pronounced?
Heart disease is a good example, where that became really stereotyped as a man's disease, largely because men tend to get it somewhat earlier than women. So women who have heart disease are really facing, the effects of both that. They go against that stereotype. So there's a kind of myth that younger women just can't get to the disease, even though it is the #1 killer of women in the U.S. And so much of that research that was done on it was done on men. So the fact that there are differences, which we now know that there really are, there are differences in symptoms and risk factors, and there's still not a lot of awareness about that. On the other hand, conditions that disproportionately affect women, I think, have kind of been relegated to the bottom of the research agenda entirely. So something like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, endometriosis, all of these things are just very poorly understood in general.
Maya, if you are a patient and feeling already sick and vulnerable, how can you ensure that you are well and truly being heard, especially if you sense that your situation is indeed being dismissed?
Yeah, well, it's so hard because I think even for the most kind of educated and privileged patients, it is very difficult to kind of push back against a medical expert. We culturally just grant so much authority to healthcare providers. And when somebody's, dismissing your symptoms or saying nothing's wrong, it can be very difficult to trust yourself. But one of my hopes for the book is just that by sort of having this context and this historical context, just realizing that there is this knowledge gap, and we don't know everything in medicine yet, and so having a little bit more of a healthy skepticism about the limitations of doctors' knowledge will empower women to really trust themselves, get a second opinion. I heard that over and over again, that you really should keep fighting to get the kind of care that you deserve, which is really somebody who you feel listens to you and has your best interests at heart.
Maya, finally and briefly, what can the medical profession do to make sure that women patients are well and truly heard?
I think it really begins with listening to women and really embracing the words, I don't know, and not just kind of reaching to the stereotype that women are hysterical to kind of explain away their symptoms that are inexplicable, because I think that that can really be the start of figuring out where those knowledge gaps are and starting to fill them, because what's happening now is that the stereotype has allowed these knowledge gaps to persist for so long.
Maya Dusenbery, thanks for being with us. We're going to have to leave it there.
Thank you.